Sunday had a smell. Every house on every street smelled the same thing by 10:30. Meat in the oven, fat beginning to spit, and underneath it something sweeter. A pudding going on, or an apple crumble, or a tin of rice sliding onto the lower shelf. You could walk the length of the road with your eyes closed and know exactly what day it was. Sunday in a working-class home in the 1970s was the most structured day of the week. Not because anyone sat down and planned it, but because it had always been done this way, and always being done this way was reason enough to keep doing it. The rhythm of Sunday was carved deep. Wake up, lie in, dinner, rest, tea, telly, bed. Every hour had its purpose, every room had its moment, and the whole thing repeated without variation every single week. That routine is gone now, shops are open, sport is on at noon, Sunday has blurred into Saturday. But for a working-class family in 1970s, Britain Sunday was something else entirely. Here is how it went. The lie-in that wasn't really a lie-in. Nobody in a working-class household slept past 8. That's the first thing to understand. Dad was up at 6 every weekday for the factory or the site or the depot, and the body doesn't know it's Sunday. Mum had been up since before him most of the week, so when Sunday arrived and nobody had to be anywhere, 8 o'clock felt like a luxury. It felt like a lie-in. It wasn't one by any modern measure. But the point wasn't the hour. The point was that nobody moved urgently. Dad came downstairs in his vest and trousers, no shirt yet. That detail mattered. The shirt stayed on its hanger on the wardrobe door until after dinner. A man in his vest on a Sunday morning, reading the paper at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, was a man at rest. The News of the World was the best-selling Sunday paper in Britain through the 1970s, regularly shifting over 6 million copies a week. It was not a paper that took itself seriously. Scandals, sport, a bit of racing, and enough gossip to keep the table occupied until the potatoes needed peeling. The Sunday Mirror came second. Between them they were in more working-class homes than any other papers. The tea was strong and it was made in a pot. Not a tea bag dropped into a mug. A pot, warmed first by swirling a splash of boiling water around it and tipping it out, then 3 or 4 teaspoons of loose leaf, then the kettle. You let it stand. You poured it through a strainer into the cup. It took 4 minutes from kettle to first sip, and those 4 minutes were not wasted time. They were the beginning of Sunday, the bacon sandwich that came before dinner. Breakfast on Sunday was not a full fry-up. That's a common misremembering. A full fry-up was a treat. Sunday's proper meal was dinner, coming at 1 o'clock, and nobody in their right mind cooked a full breakfast 3 hours before a full roast. What you got was a bacon sandwich. White bread, butter, back bacon fried in the pan, and the fat left in the bread because that was the whole point of it. A splash of brown sauce if you were that way inclined. HP or Daddy's. The bottle dark and slightly sticky around the cap from the week before. The children ate theirs at the kitchen table. Dad ate his at the kitchen table too, but with the paper propped against the milk bottle, which was the accepted position for Sunday morning reading, and nobody said anything about it. After that, the kitchen belonged to Mum, the roast that was non-negotiable. The Sunday roast was not optional. This needs stating clearly because the word optional is doing a lot of work in modern life that it never did in a 1970s working-class household. You didn't decide whether to have a roast. You had a roast. The only question was what kind. Beef was the prestige option. A joint of topside or silverside rubbed with dripping going into the oven by 10. By 11:30 the whole house smelled of it, and the children would appear in the kitchen and be sent away. Lamb was spring and early summer. Chicken was a bigger deal then than it is now because chicken was not cheap. In 1970, a whole chicken cost the equivalent of 2 or 3 hours' wages for a factory worker. You didn't have it every week. When you did have it, the whole family ate it at dinner, and the carcass went into a pot of water on Monday morning for soup. Nothing was wasted. Pork was the most common because pork was the most affordable, and crackling made the children fight over the last piece in a way that nothing else did. The crackling came off in a sheet, crunchy and salty and greasy, and Mum would break it up and distribute it before anyone had even sat down. The fastest hand got the biggest piece. The Yorkshire puddings went in when Dad called them from his chair in the front room. He'd look at the clock, look at the oven, and say, right, puddings. He wasn't doing the cooking, he was monitoring the operation. This was his contribution, and he made it with authority. Potatoes were roasted in the same tin as the meat, in the fat that had come off during cooking. Nothing added. The fat did the work. They came out brown on the outside and soft inside, and there is not a roast potato produced in a modern kitchen using olive oil and goose fat that comes within a street of what came out of a 1970s working-class oven, because the secret was the dripping, saved in a white bowl in the fridge from the week before and topped up every Sunday, the layers of it going back years. Gravy was made in the tin, tipped the fat off, put the tin on the gas, a spoonful of Bisto, and the water from the vegetables poured in while you scraped the bottom of the tin. The vegetables were carrots and cabbage. The cabbage was boiled longer than anyone would now consider acceptable. That was how it was done. The whole family sat at the table. Not the coffee table, not a tray, not in front of the telly. The kitchen table or the dining table if there was one, with proper chairs pulled up and a cloth on the top if company was coming. In the 1970s, eating at the table together wasn't a lifestyle choice promoted in parenting books. It was what you did. The children ate what was on the plate. There was no alternative being offered. Dinner time at the table. Dinner was the social event of the week for a working-class family. Everything else happened around it. The conversation across that table was the only hour in the week when everyone was in the same room with no particular place to be for the next hour, and no reason not to talk. It was also where family news travelled. Who was expecting? Who had been given the push from their job? What was happening with the house at the end of the road that had been empty since the Marshalls moved out? Your nan had information, and Sunday dinner was where it came out, delivered between mouthfuls with the certainty of someone who had spent the whole week gathering it. If the grandparents came for Sunday dinner, and in many families they came every week without the arrangement ever needing to be made, the table gained an extra layer of formality. The good plates came out, a cloth went on, Dad put his shirt on before they arrived. The conversation was the same as always, but louder, because Grandad's hearing wasn't what it was, and funnier because he was always good for a story, and the same story every week didn't make it less worth hearing. The Sunday afternoon that belonged to Dad. After the plates were cleared and the washing up was done, and in the 1970s this was hand washing, no dishwasher, Mum at the sink with her rubber gloves on, the kids drying, Sunday afternoon arrived, and Sunday afternoon, between roughly 2 and 4, belonged almost entirely to Dad. He went to the front room, the good room. He lowered himself into his chair, the chair that was understood to be his chair without anyone ever having said so, and he fell asleep in front of the racing. The television was on. The horse racing from Kempton or Newmarket or Haydock murmured in the background. His head dropped, his mouth occasionally opened. The children knew not to make noise in the front room between 2 and 4 on a Sunday. They knew it the way they knew not to ring the doorbell of a house where someone had died. It was simply understood. This was not laziness. This was a man who had worked 5.5 days that week, possibly 6, in a job that required him to be on his feet and alert and useful every hour of every shift. 2 hours in the chair on a Sunday afternoon was not a luxury. It was maintenance. The body needed it. Some dads used this time differently. Gardening was common. The allotment culture in working-class Britain was enormous in the 1970s. There were around 600,000 registered allotments in England by the middle of the decade, and the waiting lists were long because a man with an allotment had somewhere to go and something to show for going there. Onions, potatoes, runner beans, cabbages, broad beans, things that would come back to the dinner table in a form he had produced himself, that mattered in a way that is hard to explain to anyone who has never grown something from seed and watched it become food. The children were outside. This is almost a universal truth about Sunday afternoons in 1970s working-class Britain. You went out after dinner, and you came in when you were called. The street was where you were, the park, the back entry, the bit of waste ground at the bottom of the road that everyone called the field even though it wasn't a field. You played football with a tennis ball against the garage doors. You rode your bike in circles. You built something out of whatever was lying around and then dismantled it. The key thing about playing out in the 1970s, which is almost impossible to convey to anyone who didn't experience it, is how unsupervised it was. Your mum didn't know exactly where you were. She had a rough idea. The park, our street, round at so-and-so's, and that was enough. At some point she would appear at the end of the road or lean out of an upstairs window and shout your name, and you heard her because the street wasn't loud with traffic or anything else, and you came in. That system worked for decades. The Sunday walk. In many families, particularly those with grandparents involved, Sunday afternoon also meant a walk, not a hike, not exercise with a purpose, a walk. You put your coat on, and you went round the block or to the park and back, and the whole point of it was obscure to anyone under the age of 12. The Sunday walk was a ritual that came from a time when a walk was genuinely one of the few available activities on a day when nothing was open and nowhere was going. By the 1970s, it had survived into a world of televisions and bikes and back gardens, but it survived because the adults who insisted on it had grown up doing it and saw no reason to stop. Dad walked with his hands behind his back. This is almost a physical law of the British Sunday walk. Hands behind the back, slightly slower than normal pace, occasionally stopping to look at something, another man's garden, a building being done up, a car he recognised from the road, and passing comment. He might meet someone he knew, which extended the walk by 20 minutes while the two of them stood on the pavement, discussing something the children had no interest in. The children walked in small orbits around the adults, doubling back, stopping, running to catch up. Britain in the 1970s still had a significant number of public parks built by the Victorians specifically for working class leisure. The park was free. It had a bandstand that didn't always have a band. It had a pond. In some parks, there was a bowling green where old men in white played with slow, deliberate care while everyone else walked around the outside. You were not allowed on the bowling green. You knew this without being told. The bowling green had a quality of quiet authority that kept everyone off it. The walk lasted 40 minutes to an hour and ended where it began. Nobody felt much better for it. Nobody felt worse. It happened again the following Sunday. Sunday tea, the best meal of the weekend. Tea came at about 5, not dinner, not supper, tea. And Sunday tea in a working class home in the 1970s was something specific, something that doesn't quite exist anymore in the same form, and people who remember it warmly in a way that goes beyond the food itself. The centerpiece was sandwiches. Not the rolled white triangles of a hotel buffet, proper sandwiches. White bread thickly cut with real fillings, spam sliced from the tin, corned beef mashed with a little vinegar, salmon from a can, which in the 1970s was the acceptable cheaper cousin of the real thing, egg and cress, ham off the bone if someone had been to the market on Saturday and found a good deal. The sandwiches were piled on a plate in the middle of the table. Around them, a bowl of tinned peaches or mandarin oranges. A trifle made on Saturday, with proper custard poured over the Swiss roll layer and set overnight, and hundreds and thousands on the top. Angel Delight if it was a quicker week, butterscotch flavour, made by whisking powder into cold milk until it thickened and then going into individual glasses in the fridge. A Victoria sponge if Mum had had the time and the inclination, or a packet of Mr. Kipling's French Fancies, each one in its paper case if she hadn't. You ate it at the table. Everyone ate together again, which was the second time that day, which tells you something about how the day was structured around communal eating in a way that has largely disappeared. The television went on at 5:30. Sunday evening television in the 1970s was a specific and serious thing. ITV had discovered that working class audiences watched Sunday evenings in enormous numbers and had scheduled accordingly. By 1971, Sunday night at the London Palladium had run for over a decade and could pull audiences of 18 million. Stars on Sunday, the religious music programme hosted by Jess Yates, ran from 1969 and got 12 million viewers a week, despite, or because of, the fact that it was unambiguously, genuinely reverent television in a decade when reverence was becoming unfashionable. 12 million people watched it. Working class Britain watched it. The BBC had its own Sunday artillery. When The One in Line launched in 1971, it drew the kind of audience that television executives now describe as impossible. 15 million people watching a drama about a 19th century Liverpool shipping merchant, week after week, because it was well made and the theme music was Khachaturian's Spartacus ballet, and something about both of those things combined worked on people in a way nobody had quite planned. All Creatures Great and Small, which started in 1978 and was based on James Herriot's books about a Yorkshire veterinary practice, became one of the most watched shows in British television history. It was gentle, it was funny, it was set somewhere beautiful, and it asked nothing of you. On a Sunday evening after a long week, that was exactly right. The whole family watched together, on the one television, and the one television was in the front room, and nobody was simultaneously on a device doing something else. When the programme was on, the programme was on, you watched it. This is the one that surprises people who didn't live through it. In a large number of working-class homes in the 1970s, a full bath happened once a week. Sunday night was bath night, not because people were dirty, but because hot water was expensive, bathrooms were often cold, and the household boiler ran on a timer that had to be manually overridden, which cost money. A strip wash at the sink, a flannel, a bar of soap. This was what happened on the other 6 days. On Sunday, you ran the bath properly. The children went first, youngest in first, then the older ones, sometimes in the same water because running it again was wasteful. Mum added a bit more hot from the kettle to take the chill off. You lay in it properly. Hair was washed over the bath with the jug, not in the bath. In the bath you washed everything else. There was a specific order to it, working logically from top to bottom, and everyone knew the order because everyone had been taught it. In many homes through the 1970s, the bathroom was still not the warmest room. Central heating was spreading through the decade. In 1970, only about 30% of British homes had any form of central heating. But in the homes that didn't have it, the bathroom in winter required courage. You got in quick, and you got out quicker. The towel was often warmed on the rail above the electric fire in the bedroom, and you sprinted for it. Sunday evening had a particular undertow to it that everyone felt. A low-level, nameless awareness that something was ending. The weekend was going. Monday was coming. The factory, the school run, the alarm going off at 6, all of it coming back around again. Dad polished his shoes on Sunday night. This was almost universal. A tin of cherry blossom, a cloth, a brush. He'd spread a newspaper on the kitchen floor and do both pairs if he had to. The work boots getting the basic treatment, and the good shoes getting proper attention with the bone-handled brush that had been in the family longer than the children had. Polished shoes were the minimum standard of a man presenting himself properly in the world, and the polishing happened on Sunday so they were ready. School uniforms were checked. This was Mum's job. Shirts washed and ironed, laid out on the chair in the bedroom. Plimsolls chalked white if PE was tomorrow. Satchel packed with what needed to go back in it. PE kit in the bag. The dinner money envelope, a small brown envelope with the exact amount inside, which in 1970 was £1 a day, 5 bob a week, was put on the kitchen table by the back door so nobody left without it. The week was being reloaded. The machinery of the house was being reset for Monday morning, and this domestic maintenance happened quietly on Sunday night, usually while the television was on in the next room and a cup of cocoa was sitting on the side. What made Sunday in a 1970s working-class home what it was had very little to do with money. These families weren't wealthy. A factory worker's take-home pay in 1975 was around £40 a week. The Sunday joint cost perhaps 10% of that. The rest of what made Sunday was free. It was structure and proximity, and the unspoken agreement that this day, this particular day of 7, was different. Nobody called it family time. That phrase didn't exist in the language of a working-class household. It wasn't called anything. It was just Sunday. And Sunday was what it was because everyone was home and dinner was on and there was nowhere else to be, and no particular reason to want to be anywhere else. Some of it was hard. The bath was cold. The cabbage was overcooked. The children bickered. Dad fell asleep and snored through the racing. The same conversation about the same neighbours happened over the same plates every week. None of that was the point. The point was the repetition itself. The comfort of a day that ran the same way every time, that started the same and ended the same and had the same people in the same rooms doing the same things. The families who lived those Sundays didn't think of them as something worth preserving. They thought of them as just Sunday. It was only later, when Sunday became indistinguishable from any other day, when the shops opened and the sport moved and the children grew up and scattered, that what those Sundays actually were became clear. They were the glue. The one day of 7 where the family was a single unit in a single place for reasons that had nothing to do with obligation or scheduling or a calendar invite. They just were, every week, without fail, until one day they weren't. If any of that took you back, let us know in the comments what Sunday looked like in your house. The meal, the chair, the telly programme, the bath in order, those details deserve to be written down somewhere. Please subscribe to the channel to keep these stories alive.